Hello, and welcome to this month's episode of the No Name Book Club. I'm actually pretending it's yesterday because I forgot to push the record button at the right time yesterday. So I'm adding a few bits and pieces to the front of the regular Zoom recording. The invitation I sent out said, bring your own or favorite books and beverage, and we'll spend a few minutes listening to you talk about each one of those. So let's get started with Carl Rust from Elkhart, Indiana. He was a public school educator for many, many years. He's a member of the unschoolingschool.com team, and he's currently working in a nature center.
Hi everyone, Carl Russ here to tell you about my new book, Get Out of the Way and Let Kids Learn. Are you frustrated with your school? Are classes boring and out of touch with real life? Are the things that you really want to learn about? You should get this book and give it to your teachers and principal. Are you a teacher or a principal who feels trapped in a system that you didn't create? I've got some great suggestions in here about how you can start to get untrapped. This book is available on Amazon and at select bookstores. And in this book, I talk about 9 ideas that schools are holding on to with an iron grip, even though we know they don't work for a lot of kids. But I'm giving you some suggestions on how you can critically look at those 9 things and think about how at your school you might begin to be more free. So check me out on Amazon. In future videos, I'm going to be discussing the 9 ideas one at a time, so stay tuned for those. But in the meantime, go out and get your very own copy of Get Out of the Way and Let Kids Learn. See you next time.
Thanks, Carl. I have your book, and it's wonderful. I'll raise an empty glass to you because it's today and not yesterday. Thank you. Next up is one of our most experienced and most respected authors from Minnesota, Wayne Jennings.
We don't know anything different. We experience traditional schools. If you see something about a school or a classroom on TV, it's traditional. It's straight rows of desks, teachers in front. Every movie shows it that way. So the paradigm is well fixed, but it can be done differently, and some schools are. So that's the reason for examples. The second, I think, strength of the book that it provides what are the learning activities that would go on in a transformed school? And so there's quite a list of those. Many of those from my experience and from my observation from my reading. Essentially, I suppose you could divide it into key concepts of schools need to be democratic, the decision making needs to be democratic, there needs to be personal learning plans rather than batch fed kinds of schools. Teachers need to be facilitators of learning, guides on the side rather than stages. No, it's sages on the stage. And that schools should deal with real problems of today. I mean, we have enormous problems having to do with equity, pollution, um, wars, and somehow or other studying in school about sonnets and whiskey rebellion and mostly things that are distant in time and place is not doing the job. So there's school transformation in a nutshell. It's available from Amazon and major bookstores worldwide. And as I point out, it's free to use materials. It has some rare and extraordinary materials like the Poor Scholar's Soliloquy and Recalled for Revision. Some of those are quite amazing. There's a little bit about evaluation and technology, but those are separate books. And so I couldn't cover those except briefly. That's it.
I want to propose a toast to you, Wayne. I've got your book. I've read pretty much half of it, and I'm amazed at the depth and breadth of what you have covered. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Sydney.
Would you mind going to the link in the chat box and entering your book into the form that we have there? So anybody else who has a book to share, could you do your digital hand raise thing? So I'll remember that people are in that situation. We don't have a whole lot of us here today, so it's not going to be all that complicated, but it'd be great if we have some reminders. Wonderful. I see Ted and Heidi and Denise. Joe, you got one? Okay. I'm using the participants list and I got Heidi at the top of my list. Welcome, Heidi. You have a book you'd like to share with us?
Hi. A book that I had been reading for a while, a few months ago, and then finished up about a month or so ago, pulled back out. It's called Guerrilla Learning, Guerrilla. And then the subtitle is How to Give Your Kids a Real Education with or Without School. And it's both by Grace Llewellyn, who wrote the Teenage Liberation Handbook, and also by Amy Silver. And the thing that I like about it is just to clarify, I'm not actually a parent, and the subtitle isn't necessarily what I would want if I were sharing it to try to be a guide or a resource for transforming the public system, but because it seems like it seems to be geared toward supporting individual families in their kids. But what I liked about it was that's fine, and that can work well. What I liked was in seeking to know what is the new paradigm, not just what are we against, but what are we for. I was kind of struggling with getting a feel for that, and this book really helped me to flesh it out, both they named several keys for what they called guerrilla learning, and they set it up as being something you could do to supplement if the kids are going to school, or you could do it by a non-school approach. But what I liked was they talked about the 5 keys to guerrilla learning. One is opportunity, another is timing, the third is interest, the fourth is freedom, and the fifth is support. So because I was kind of wondering, okay, and I don't have the same kind of experience that many of you have had with democratic schools or unschooling, whatever it might be. I am the co-parent or the co-servant of multiple cats, so I do know what it's like to support self-directed lives, and well, getting trained by them. But and I'm a piano teacher and pianist and organist, so I had the luxury of not having to be in a system if I wanted to teach adults or kids, and could respond to their timing to some extent. Anyway, so what I liked was that they also gave anecdotes, examples of experiences with their own kids, and it showed that it wasn't just about being hands off and saying, okay, whatever, bye, and just leaving your young people to their own devices without being a warm and caring support person. And at the same time, it also wasn't in trying to enforce your curriculum onto them. So there was when they said, talked about opportunity, that included creating a rich environment, having multiple things available, whether in the community or in your home and that kind of thing. So it wasn't just never suggesting anything or never providing resources that might lead them to, oh, notice that if you've got these resources in the house, they just might be geared toward doing that. But then the timing of when kids were asking questions or when they were interested in something piqued their interest, going with that, not overdoing it, not trying to, bury them in an ocean if they just wanted to ask one question, but just helping to do that. And then the last one, so the last two were freedom and support. So it wasn't just about the freedom to make choices about what they were interested in, but it was also the support, whether that was getting them transportation to a place that offered, of course, a dance class or a field trip or something, or having resources or supporting them in raising funds or things like that, like both nuts and bolts types of support as well as emotional support in the journey. So that was really helpful, because for me, I have just been knowing from my paradigm shift in the fall of '88 that the whole education system is supposed to be changed. And then I'm going, okay, now what does that look like? And I kind of have a sense of the don'ts that we've talked about that I've in attending ERA conferences or doing my own reading. And even if I do read some things, it doesn't always stick. What are the do's? How do we flesh that out? And how is that really a vibrant, positive alternative instead of just saying we're not going to teach calculus to everybody and blah, 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 or we're going to not do this. And what is that? How does that flesh out? Anyway, so that's the book that I wanted to mention for now.
Can you repeat the title again, Heidi?
Yes. It's called Guerrilla, Guerrilla, learning, because it's kind of not just conventional. And then the subtitle, How to Give Your Kids a Real Education with or Without School.
Here's to you and Grace and Amy for Guerrilla Learning. Cheers.
Yep.
In the interest of equality among the genders, the next guy that we have available is Ted.
You've heard me talk about my book a number of times before, and because of this group and Richard Fransham, who has not always been the strongest advocate for what I'm talking about, I have had some epiphanies related to Robert's Rules for Kids and Big Kids, a guide to teaching children of all ages the basics of parliamentary procedure. And one of the epiphanies I've had recently is that I probably need to do another edition of this book, and that I've done it wrong. The book is supposed to be about collective decision-making. And while I've had the assistance of Dr. Martha Hahn, whose health is not that good right now, I've concluded that it ought to be a group effort. So if any of you want to participate in the writing of the third edition of Robert's Rules for Kids and Big Kids, I hope you will let me know. The idea being that we'll sell it to every school everywhere in the world, and there'll be so much money coming in that no one will care about having to split the proceeds among the group or even donate it to charity. Another epiphany I've had recently is that we talk a lot in the United States these days about attempts to suppress the vote, voter suppression. And I think one way that we have done this is by not engaging students in school in the democratic process. We have maybe an election for a student government, and then those kids who get elected to student government are never seen or heard from again. In Robert's Rules for Kids, the idea is that every kid in the school is involved. Every kid is able to present an idea that is then discussed in a committee format, and then it's funneled up to the student government, who ultimately votes on the issue at hand. Robert's Rules is really good because it delves into bylaws and what belongs in them. It has a different set of rules for small boards and committee meetings, including the fact that you have to have consensus to close debate in those environments. Ultimately, you vote if the body is ready to vote on the issue by a 2/3 vote. But in a committee, you have to have total consensus. Having been forced to read what sociocracy is all about, and that seems to be the alternative to Robert's Rules of Order, what I've discovered is that when you can't reach consensus which is the dominant theme in sociocracy as opposed to majority rule, which is in Robert's Rules of Order, you have this huge system that is set up to advance the idea to the next layer and the next layer and the next layer. And by the time it ultimately gets resolved, I think many people will be old and gray. Robert's Rules of Order, just to sort of wrap this up, touches on agendas, how you run a committee of the whole meeting, how you conduct, and you have many different options, elections, how to address discipline issues, and it truly encourages a diversity of opinion. And that's what I think is key, is that you're getting kids to think critically, and as a result, everybody is involved in the process. So with that, I'd actually love to entertain questions or comments, but if time will not allow for that, I will stop, except to say one other thing. On a completely different issue, there is a subject that I've gotten very involved in, and it is called blockbusting. You all, if you have any relationship to the teaching of history, especially African-American history, you ought to know about blockbusting, and you ought to include it in your curriculum. There is a video that runs about 3 hours, and it describes a neighborhood here in Houston, Texas. And it talks about how a neighborhood transformed from being all white to all Black. And it's a process that occurred all over the United States, and yet most people don't know about it. With that, I will pass the gavel.
Well, cheers to you, Ted. Pushing a structure like that is hard for all of us nonconformists, you know, and I think it's a really important thing to move things ahead. So
I've read Ted's book, and it is good, and takes the mystery out of sort of an arcane subject of Robert's Rules of Order.
So what do you say we move ahead for Denise? Denise has a really cool project that she wants to tell you about.
Well, I was going to say it's technically not a book, so I don't know that it would qualify, but to share it with a group this auspicious would be a good thing. I've known Joe Nathan for a while now, and have long admired his work. He was a good pal of my father-in-law, Ron Wolk, who was the founding publisher of Education Week, and always spoke highly of you.
Great, both of them are great.
Yeah, but he was a good man. So I have been doing work on the corners of school transformation, school reform for a long time. I am now working in a small consultancy, rewriting the Safe and Supportive Schools framework for the state of Massachusetts. So it's been a big piece of work. It's taken us more than a year. And we have finally finished the draft that has been put out and posted on their website for public comment. It's much more a structure to support and try to improve traditional schools, because unfortunately sometimes we have to meet kids where they are, but it really advocates for aligning systems to be much more safe and supportive and student-centered. So advocating for personalized learning plans, advocating for embedding social and emotional learning, advocating for allowing teachers to work in professional learning communities and taking a holistic approach to how we work in schools and how we do schooling. And like everything else in this crazy world in the past year, everything's been interrupted by COVID. The whole state was thrown into distance learning without preparation. Some districts have done an okay job of it. The Matamoy district out on the Cape, Sydney, has actually done a particularly good job with it, but most districts and schools have struggled mightily, and we all know about that. And I think that groups like this have long imagined having an opportunity to reimagine what schools might be if they had to have such a chronic disruption. So I am hopeful that our safe and supportive schools framework can be adopted by more people. It does not neatly fit into the book sharing introduction, but later when the chat is re-enabled, I will post a link to it, along with a PDF of just kind of an executive summary. And I would invite anyone who has any interest in looking at this, checking it out. The actual framework is a guidebook for school-based teams to really look at their data, see if it aligns to this framework that we're calling the essential elements of a safe and supportive school. So it's really looking at a whole child approach, looking at teaching and learning. So it's really looking at anti-racism. It's looking at being culturally responsive, and what does that really mean at the heart of things. And then, being in a continuous improvement cycle of reviewing and ensuring that we're constantly building from what we've had. So it includes rubrics, it includes a guide for how teachers could look at this, how to use their data properly to build a plan, and so on. And granted, it's sponsored by and enabled by the state of Massachusetts Department of Education. So it's a state framework, but I think there's some good stuff in there. And I invite any and all of y'all to take a look. It is the State of Massachusetts Safe and Supportive Schools Framework, SASS for short.
Can I ask a question, Denise?
Absolutely.
Hi, my name's Stephanie Schuler. I'm in Toronto, Canada right now. It sounds so good and really nice to be meeting you and talking to you. You mentioned that kids are going to be having individual education plans. Is that all kids? Like what does that look like?
Well, we're advocating for personalized learning plans, and I've worked in districts and schools around the country that have implemented this sort of thing. I did a lot of work with the Big Picture Company, which I'm sure you're probably familiar with. My own son actually attended the Met in Providence, and I've worked with other districts in the United States that have worked to implement personalized learning plans. It's generally done better in charter schools, because they think they have more freedom than others do. I can tell you that it would be probably a no sell to many districts because they just don't want to go there, but we are positing it in the Safe and Supportive Schools framework as one way to approach whole child support.
Oh, I'm really happy about that. And like, was it a hard sell? And are the kids involved within their personalized learning programs? Are their parents involved? They've got so many questions, but because it's really a forerunner in the formal system, in the conventional system, and that's great.
Well, and I don't want to go too far down the road, but in Danvers, Massachusetts, Ted and Nancy Sizer started a charter school called the Francis Parker Charter School. And if I were to look for a model hold up of a middle and high school that has personalized learning plans at the heart of what they do, and student advisory programs at the heart of how they serve students, that is a place where it not only is working well, it's a model for the world to see. And in a more traditional framework of classes than something like a Big Picture Company where it's all learning through internships. So this is an opportunity for schools with a more traditional look and feel to them to embed personalized learning plans. And it is student directed. It is student interest based. It provides for exhibitions to their parents in a, again, a similar way that a big picture school would. And it also provides parent input. So there's a whole connected system of how they do this in that school. Again, it's fantastic to see. And again, I can put links to them in the chat box as
So
well.
Denise, could you put those links in the form too, the Google form that's at the top of the
It's not
chat?
introducing the books, correct? I'll do the best I'll put as much information as I can in there.
Great, because I know you're looking for feedback. And so if you can give it a way to give you that as well, that would be wonderful.
I'll put them in there. And then, you know, if you, Stephanie, wanted to have an offline conversation when we're not usurping everybody else's time, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm like walk and talk.
My audio was off, but I toasted you for thinking about the kids who are there now, you know, and can't wait for transportation or transformation. So thank you for that. Derry, I see you popped in and you're now on the phone. So we'll give you some time there. Do you want to give us a couple of minutes about your book?
Well, will you promise to ring a bell when the 2 minutes is up, or else I'll have Ted after me?
I've been lenient with everybody else, but with you, I'm not going to be lenient. So look out.
Oh, okay. Right. Well, I've had a funny week for books, and I really don't want to talk about mine. I've had books floating in through the front door. So I'll share a couple of mysteries with you. This one's just arrived from Puerto Rico, from San Juan, and I've no idea who sent it to me. And different chapters are written by different people. And the theme of the book is set in 2184. And the theme seems to be, how could we possibly have fucked things up in the way that we did? And the extraordinary thing about this book is different chapters in the future are written by people I know. Gerard Huttner from Germany, Helena Singer from Brazil, Jose Pacheco, who started a school in Portugal called the Bridge School, and he's now working in Sao Paulo, I think, in Brazil. Manish Jain, who features in Carol Black's film about schooling the world, and who was at the Ecoversities conference last weekend. And my old mate Yakov Hector's got a chapter in here. And when you get to chapter 2, you discover 14 pages blank. And you're supposed to write your own chapter 2 and send it on to somebody else. But I've no idea who sent me this, and whoever did hasn't written a chapter 2, which makes the book a bit boring. Anyway, the book is called Edu Shifts. The Future of Education is Now. And I wondered if anyone here knows anything about this book and can help me understand what it is. I wonder, perhaps Charlie, he's in Brazil all the time. Sao Paulo's not, San Juan's not far from Brazil, a couple of 1,000 miles maybe. What's that between friends? Charlie, do you know anything about this book?
No, I don't actually, but that's a good one. I'll have a look at it. I know the kind of stuff that Pacheco talks about, at least. I've seen him talk a couple of times.
Yeah, I think the content's pretty good. It's just, as it was written in 2184, and the person who's supposed to have written a chapter before they sent it to me didn't, it's a bit hard to know. Anyway, look, we'll talk about it later, Charlie. Thank you. I've got another lovely one's just arrived. We're trying to do things differently. Have I got a few seconds left, Sydney?
Go for it, Derry.
Okay, this one looks really interesting. This is written by a social studies teacher in London University, and she's written it with her students. So the different chapters are written by the teacher and by various combinations of students. And it seems to be about social inequity, the injustices of the school system and of society as a whole, and the effect it has on relationships in universities. And they've struggled to create a democratic class that isn't just democracy in terms of cognition, but is just built around democratic respect of an emotional kind. So some sections of the book seem to be written in poetry. Everyone's had a go. And the nice thing is, I know the person, this particular teacher called Freya Aquarone. She actually went to Summerhill School years ago, is now doing a PhD in democratic education, doing some teaching part-time on the side. And already she's produced a quite revolutionary book. We're trying to do things differently. The challenges of relationships and recognition in higher education. And just to finish, I've got this one from somebody who's read my book, who says this is their book, and it says a lot of similar things, called The Futility of School Reform. Well, I'm not sure that it is totally futile trying to reform schools, but this guy thinks it is. It's a waste of time, and they've got to be taken out into the Atlantic and sunk, and we've got to start again, I think. So that's The Futility of School Reform, John Pierce. And just lastly, Charles Walkup. This is a sad book. There was a very successful Sudbury school started in Bavaria near to Munich at a place called Ammersee. And it was really doing well. It had got about 50 kids, and the inspectors turned up and they've shut it down. And this is Charles Walkup's attempt to understand what's happened and what on earth the local community that supported the school should do. Now the inspectors have literally just come in and just closed them down. They took the inspectors to court, spent a lot of money and lost. So this book's probably going to be a bit depressing. Education is an admirable thing if you can find it. There, I'll stop there. Thanks, Sydney.
Well, Derry, it's okay because the books that you and Wayne and Carl have written are going to fix it all. And maybe Joe.
Okay.
The tax you pay for talking so much is you have to put those books into the Google form, okay?
Yeah,
Joe,
I've got
you're up
another
next.
one I'll put in as well.
Okay.
Okay, that'll
Joe.
do. That's enough for this week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Barry, I just wanted to add that I am familiar with EduShifts, but I haven't read it. I haven't received it. But it's actually a movement. It's more of a movement, and the book was to support the movement. And I think there's a game associated with it too, but there's a website. Anyway, the idea is that you would write the chapter 2 that's missing.
Okay, but who do I send it to? Shall I send it to you, Liz, as you haven't had it? I'll write chapter 2 and send it to you. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
It's all you, Joe. Go for it.
Okay, I'm gonna do real quickly. I'm gonna talk about learning, not just schooling. The first book that I want to recommend is Dream Keepers by Langston Hughes, who's an extraordinary poet. And I'm going to read one of his incredible poets. He received a huge amount of acclaim here in the United States. It's brief. It's called Hold Fast to Dreams. For if dreams die, life is a broken winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field covered with snow. Another, and he won the Pulitzer Prize. He won almost every literary award in the United States, but the next has to do with keep going, and it's called Mother to Son. Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it and splinters and boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor, bare. But all the time I've been climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on the steps because you find it's getting kind of hard. Don't you fall now, for I'm still going, honey. I'm still climbing, and life for me ain't been no crystal stair. So Langston Hughes, strongly recommended, incredible poetry, many, many poems. Picking up on that theme, a lifetime of organizing. Some of you are familiar with Rosa Parks. She attended a school for adults called the Highlander School, which was really a revolutionary academy in Tennessee. And this book is called The Long Haul by Miles Horton with Judith and Herb Cole. And they tell the story of about 6 decades of community organizing, learning writ large, not just in schools, but actually community organizing to transform society for justice. So The Long Haul, Miles Horton, Judith and Herb Cole. The third book that I wanted to mention, I apologize because I actually, it's not here, but I'm going to show you a picture of it. Um, it's the most valuable book that I ever read about getting things done. It's called Rules for Radicals by Saul, that's the first name, Alinsky, Alinsky, Saul Alinsky. I actually had the opportunity to be trained by Saul Alinsky in Chicago in the fall of 1969. And it was by far the most valuable book I ever read, and the most valuable experience I ever had about getting things actually done, taking ideas from people's heads and getting them actually done. And I want to just praise a mentor and friend, Wayne Jennings, because we were talking a few minutes ago about the idea of having every youngster have an individual plan. Well, actually, Wayne Jennings organized with a group of mothers, and I do mean to say mothers, a multiracial group of mothers, a K through 12 school in the fall of 1971, which in many respects is still going today in St. Paul as a part of the district. And one of the central features was an advisor-advisee system, which started in August. Every year, every student sat down ages 5 through 18 with an advisor and developed an individual plan. And then the graduation was based on demonstration of skill and knowledge. And then finally, I want to mention a book that I wrote called Charter Schools Creating Hope and Opportunity. It was the first book that was written and published in the United States that talked about the charter movement phenomenon. So those are 4 books. I hope that they're useful.
Actually, we have somebody who's been here the whole time waiting in line, so maybe we'll go to Stephanie first and then to Jerry. Stephanie, are you still there?
I am. I'm going to be really fast. So I work as an education consultant, and a lot of the times I'm working with parents who are trying to wrap their heads around the fact that school's not a good fit for their kids. It's often teens, and it's a very traumatic process for them to step from one system of thinking into another. So I'm always looking for resources to support them, to help them see that it's okay, it's going to be fine, they're not the only ones, etc. So these are 2 favorite resources for that. Blake Bowles' College Without High School. And I like that because he spends so much time talking about the value of non-conventional routes through education. So it's relevant for many, many people. And then more recently, many people in the group know about the Dark Horse Project and the book that's been written about that by Todd Rose and Ogi Ogas. And I like this because it talks about fulfillment and what that means. And it doesn't have to be like, I'm going to be a lawyer, therefore I have to do all this. It helps you stay focused in the present of what works to fulfill me, what nourishes me, what allows me to be the person I am, and allowing that to move forward into your future. So those are my 2 books.
Stephanie, Todd Rose's first book, The End of Average, is phenomenal too.
Yeah, that's a great book.
Thank you. It's on my list to read and I haven't yet read it. And actually, it's the first nonfiction book that I've read from cover to cover for a really long time. I actually read every single word, which I never do. So I will definitely get The End of Average. Thank you, Nathan.
Thanks, Stephanie. So it's 5:01. Are people willing to go on for a few more minutes? So we have a guest speaker from South Africa. She's probably asleep right now, but she sent me a little bit of a video. And so I'm going to share the screen and put Jana Clements on there.
So thank you for having me. That I can't be here in person. Sid invited me, and I cannot possibly say no to such a beautiful soul, and one who has given me so much cheerleading and support in my publishing darkest hours, helping me get to the point where these books are no longer hidden in a file somewhere in the computer. So briefly, this is how can we support young people in self-directed education. This is currently available in ebook. I think later this year it will be in print. And it's really looking at facilitation of SDE as a path of personal growth, but also from a very practical perspective, looking at how to and the difference between facilitating SDE and teaching as a progressive teacher. And it's really designed to help you get your confidence. So I hope you'll enjoy that one. Then this is the blue one. How does self-directed education work and Why. This is a bit more of a technical one, more theoretical, a bit more of a challenging read. But again, it really deeply differentiates self-directed education from all of the other forms of alternative education and gives some insight into how it works and why, which is why the title is as it is. This one also is still forthcoming in print. It's also already available in ebook. And then last, but far from least, What If School Creates Dyslexia? I think this is probably the most readable, hopefully because it's also the most recent, and I hope I'm getting better as I go along. And yeah, I certainly had fun writing this book, and it's quite a cheeky book. Apparently, it's a lot of fun to read. I'd love to know what you think. So this really looks at dyslexia as a pivot point for our cause, in that literacy is such a holy grail for education that it's used to justify all of the coercion and all of the suffering and all of the misery, because we just have to get children literate. Whereas when we really look closely at it, the amazing thing that I realized when investigating is that it's almost impossible to prevent a child from learning to read in our day and age, and schools managing it, sure enough. So this is really an eye-opener, and a very nice book, I think, also to give to beginners who haven't really come across SDE before, because as much as it's exploring dyslexia, it's ultimately really questioning the value or the need or the damage done by coercion in education for all kids. So you can contact aliasbl@gmail.com for any of these titles to find out about their availability. For example, What If School Creates Dyslexia, you can order in print right now, but it'll be shipped from Europe. Soon it's going to be available on Amazon. They're just busy doing the quality check. And Ali ASBL, Katie there, and Max there will be able to let you know when you can get it if you want to get it via Amazon. It's also available in French, which is going to be in Le Lettre Myriades, sorry, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, catalogue in May. So cheers, and here's to Sid and all Sid's friends, and I hope you have a lovely bring your own book and beverage.
I would just make one comment about dyslexia. Herb Cole calls it dysteachia.
Good one, Wayne.
Dysteachia.
That goes along with changing teachable moment to learnable moment. I have so many books I want to talk about. It's almost unbelievable. I always used to think my favorite book was a book written 53 years ago called Education and Ecstasy, which Richard knows about, by George Leonard. And then I realized that he thought things would be better in 2001, and that was 20 years ago, and we haven't gotten there yet. So we have a lot of work to do. Instead, I want to talk about a book, a little known book probably, that most people haven't heard of, called Turning Learning Right Side Up, which was written as a conversation by email between Daniel Greenberg, who we probably all have heard of from the Sudbury Valley School, and a professor named Russell Ackoff at the Wharton School of Business, University of Pennsylvania. And they decided to take on this notion of how can we figure out what the best school possible is. And one of the things that Russell teaches at the Wharton School is idealized design, which he calls an idealized redesign of a system as a design of the system with which its designers would replace the existing system right now if they were free to replace it with any system they wanted. And that means that their design would have to be technologically feasible, operationally viable, and capable of being improved continuously from within and without. So their idealized design that they came up with has to be implementable right now, given all the things that are in place. And some of the characteristics of the design that they come to in this book sound like this. Ideal schools will differ according to the needs and desires of their constituents. They all, however, would share some key characteristics. All are devoted to encouraging the maximal possible realization of each student's aspirations. All provide an environment in which students define their own goals, are activated by self-motivation to work toward realizing their goals, and are given free rein to learn on their own and with the collaboration of others in such manner and at such pace as they wish. All are self-governing communities where all stakeholders have a full voice in determining all aspects of their operation: rules, finances, personnel, and administration. I just found this an incredibly valuable book because it takes a stab at figuring out how we can change things realistically to be exactly what we want them to be, given a system redesign. And I know there are barriers, but this was written 12 years ago and it hasn't happened yet, but I think it's a valuable resource to get us to where we want to go.
Repeat the title, please.
It's called Turning Learning Right Side Up.
Okay, thank you.
Russell Ackoff and Daniel Greenberg. Jerry, are you there? Tell me what you want your book to do.
My book.
Your book.
Well,
in 3 sentences.
I wanted to empower people to create alternatives that can serve as models for what people are searching for now.
It's a great book. I loved it, I have to say.
I'm disappointed that it hasn't caught on because it really does give, I think, a nice overview of the change that's taking place and that needs to happen.
Well, nobody loves a prophet's book until 500 years later, so don't worry. There's still time.
What's the title? Is this one you wrote a while back or one you're working on now?
The original one, homework and recess all day, but this is the one that's more than a revision of it. It was really a reworking of the whole thing. It's School's Over, How to Have Freedom and Democracy in Education. I feel it's a very approachable book, and it relates to the way I like to do everything. I don't like to do an ivory tower type thing. You know, I want people to find it very easy to understand.
Sydney, if I can just jump in, I thought BYOB was Bring Your Own Baby, but the one book that I would recommend is Difference Making at the Heart of Learning. Best book I've read in the last year by Tom Vander Ark and Emily Liebtag. Just, it's short, it's really readable, a ton of tools and examples of the type of, you know, learning systems that are already, you know, taking root all over. So great book, Difference Making at the Heart of Learning. Would be my one recommendation. And this is, by the way, 12-day-old Livia.
Wow, let's drink to her.
Wow.
Everybody raise a glass. We're doing this for you, Olivia.
Just Livia, no O, just Livia.
Livia, it's all for you.
Yeah.
She gets to hear the hum of our voices.
She loves it. Put her to sleep.
I think she's the most important contribution that was brought to the evening.
Hey, I got a question for Jerry. What counts as catching on? You said you were disappointed your book didn't catch on. What counts as catch on?
Something that gets to enough people that real change can start taking place. By the way, we were talking about books that we thought were good. I still think that Summerhill hasn't really been matched in any way. And there's a book related to that called Talks to Parents and Teachers. And this is about Homer Lane. And Homer Lane never actually wrote a book. That was a book that was based on his talks, but he was pretty much A.S. Neal's mentor. And he was the one who, you know, started the Little Commonwealth in England. And one of my favorite stories that he tells in that book is that when he was the head of this basically reformatory, they brought a kid to him before the judge who was going to be remanded to his custody. And he said, I thought that we really needed to give this child a real taste of true authority. And so he goes back into the chambers and Lane says to the kid, okay, so if you come tomorrow at such and such time, we'll meet you with a carriage, but otherwise you'll have to make your way to the Little Commonwealth on your own. Here's some money, take your mom home, and then we'll meet you there if you come to that. And the kid was absolutely incredulous because he thought he was going to be taken off in handcuffs. And of course, this was Lane's example of true authority, which was the authority of the kid himself. And he continues on, he says, so I told this to a regular school teacher, it's this custodian of children's souls, he says, and he said, well, you certainly have a magical way of influencing students. And he said, no, you don't get this at all. You know, the whole idea is not to try to do that. Anyway, that's one of my favorite stories.
The other book about Home Alone is this one. I don't know if you know it. The extraordinary thing about Home Alone, I don't know if you know this, Jerry, but he went to school in Framingham, and that is just complete coincidence that that's where Sudbury Valley is now. Really strange coincidence.
I can take it further than that. He was he was born in Vermont, which is where I did my school, and then he eventually wound up teaching in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is where I was born. And so there's a lot of coincidences with Homer Lane.
There's so many sources and so many places we have yet to go, but I want to thank you all for showing up and sharing what you had to recommend. There's 116 of us on this list, email list, and 16 of us showed up. But I'm going to pump these titles out to everybody so that all the recommendations you've made, we'll get to them anyway.
Sydney, can I add something in here?
Absolutely.
Just me to everyone, it's in the chat. The first of the few things I have there, Marianne and Charlie are hosting one of the 100 conversations, an event of that nature. And particularly people in the US to contribute to that would be great. And so if you click on that first of the links, that would be great. And then I wanted to, Ted is still here. I am not against Robert's rules. I'm just looking at getting people to want to run democratic meetings, first of all, and then we can look at Robert's rules. But also with sociocracy, that's about consent. It's not about consensus from my point of view. And I think it marries really nicely with democracy, practicing the two together, that we get to something more than mob rule. And that's all. Thanks. Sydney, this has been great. Good idea.
Well, it seems like fun. Laura, do you have a book?
Yes, I do. I will be very quick. So my book is How Change Happens, Why some social movements succeed and while others don't. And so I just started reading it, and I think it would be very beneficial for this group because I think a lot of times we have a lot of great ideas in education. Some of us, like Wayne Jennings and others, do manage a way to implement them, but we can't implement them at scale. Right. So I think that's why I started reading this book, to see if I could learn from other movements into how do we implement these fabulous ideas that are happening in silos, but are not happening at scale. And so some of the, just so give a brief overview of the findings that if you're interested, you can learn more about. Is turn grassroots gold. So there has to be a grassroots element to the work we're doing in order to turn it into a movement. Sharpen your 10, 10, 10, 20 to 50 vision. So it says here, successful US movements plowed through all 50 states with their change campaigns rather than focusing only on sweeping federal reforms. So in the US, we are very decentralized because we do have a very strong state system. So therefore, if we want to create broad federal change, we need to start at the grassroots level and at the local level. That's one of the reasons I'm working for the mayor's office. Change hearts and policies. So really it also talks about the importance of hitting people's value systems, not just creating policy. And using stories, using data. Of course, data is really important, but coupling that data with emotional and value-oriented strategies. Reckon with adversarial allies. So instead of combating those that don't believe in the work or don't understand the work, finding ways to work with them. So this talks about that. And then break from business as usual and be leaderful. So I think And it talks about what do we mean by business as usual. We have to have some really radical components, not only in our ideologies, but in our strategies. So I'll leave you with that, but definitely recommend this book.
Thank you, Laura. Well, it's our job to make change happen, folks. So we have to stop reading at some point and go out and make it happen. Have a good evening.
Everything starts with the first step. That was Mao Zedong, wasn't it?